Brother Richard.
How are you?
You're very welcome to the Modern Warrior podcast. I'm honored to have you here.
It's a privilege to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I know you're a very busy man. It's taken us quite some time to make this happen. But
logistics are always interesting.
They are, especially when it comes to in-person podcasts. But this quite a unique individual I see in you, and you've been brought to my attention through other podcasts you've been on, and absolutely love the work you're doing. And it's something I feel that is certainly missing in the world today, is connection back to ourselves, which I feel is something that you're a massive advocate for, is coming back to ourselves again, which we'll go into in this podcast. But even from yourself at the moment and the journey you've been on to get you here today, in terms of the work you do and the purpose and the mission that you have, what was the influence for you to take this path of becoming a friar?
I suppose it's funny, when people ask you origin stories, you can have the kind of pat origin story that you kind of reel off, what you tell someone at a bus stop, kind of. But I suppose at a kind of a deeper level, I was always somebody who was asking kind of the deep questions or the big questions, the kind of pupil teachers hate, because you don't just want the fact answer. You're asking the why behind it all, and a lot of us fall out of that stage and we just keep going. But for me, the why was really important. So that was kind of always something that was there. What was it all about, really? And then I was brought up in a community of faith, Catholic family, 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s. So it was that very homogenous, generic kind of Irish Catholicism of its time, with all of the joys and sorrows and good and bad of all of that. But it did mean that I was part of a community that had depth, had wisdom behind it, had a kind of a connection, a connectivity to the divine. And I found that answered some of the hunger for the why that was there. And then going on in school, I was very interested in the natural world, very interested in kind of nature, all of that kind of stuff, had all kinds of pets and animals and caused all kinds of chaos with them along the way. And as far as I was concerned, school would finish and I would head to go to college to study zoology. That was the kind of idea. That was the sort of plan. And then round about the age of 14, because people forget the school system was a lot shorter before, so there was no transition years. I went into school early, so I was 3.5 when I went in. So I was, by 14, I was kind of already over what we call the inter-cert, the junior cert now. And we were already being asked to look at career, think about career and stuff like that. So naturally, I had the idea around college, etc. But I still felt there was something missing. There was a hunger in me for something deeper. And around about that time, somebody gave me a book on the life of St. Francis of Assisi, who's the founder of the order that I now belong to. And something clicked. It lay there for a long time, but when I finally picked it up to read it, something just really clicked in it. It was the fusion of the deep practice of St. Francis, the deep contemplation, his connection with the divine and connection with nature, creation, etc. And also the story of a young man who was struggling to know what his purpose was in life. He left it all. He would have been the kind of, it'd be like nowadays if somebody who was, billionaire celebrity suddenly decided that's it, chucking it all in. That was the story of the day. So I read a fair bit about him, and then it still continued to pull at me. And I said, God, I wonder, are these guys still around? Because I'd never met a friar before, never met a Franciscan before. So pre-internet days, pulled out the phone book and flicked through and found the Capuchin Franciscans, which is the branch I now belong to, because C comes before F when you're looking alphabetically. And I discovered not only were they around, but they had a community in Dublin. So I phoned the community. I was 16 at this stage, and answered by a very nice man on the phone, one of the brothers that I later got to know very, very well. And he said, "Oh yeah, if you're interested, pop in." And then he must have heard the slightly broken voice or whatever, and he said, how old are you? And I said 16. And he said, "Oh, that's far too young, absolutely far too young." He said, "If you're going to come in and visit us, you have to bring your parents with you." So I was now in the dilemma of, okay, now I have to have the conversation with the parents, kind of thing. And I did, and they were sort of taken aback, but at the same time I think my mother particularly had kind of seen maybe there was something stirring in me around this end of things. So they agreed they'd come in with me. We made an appointment. I went in. My mother's first reaction to seeing the brothers was, "You cannot join here." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "They don't wear socks. You'll catch your death of cold." Typical Irish mother. But we went in and we met them, and kind of put my parents' mind to rest, because they weren't saying, "Oh, he's in next week," kind of thing. They were saying, "Oh no, there's a couple of years of thinking and discerning, but he's welcome to visit as often as he wants." So I used to go in and visit once a month or so. Got to know the brothers quite well. And what I found within it was the original inspiration of the St. Francis of the Middle Ages was alive and well in 1990s Dublin, sitting in the middle of the North Inner City, where the brothers had been since the 1600s, responding to all of the various needs and problems and issues that were in there. And, they looked after the homeless, which we still do, and they were working in the prisons, and they were working in the hospitals with the sick and the dying, and it was open house. Everybody was very happy. And yet there was a core of meditative practice, of deep, deep stillness, deep reflection. And it was also brotherhood. It was brothers ranging in age from 90s down to 20s, all living together, working together. There was no airs and graces. They were brothers, but they were men, and everybody kind of got on as best they could. And, they didn't disguise it when things, sometimes there was friction or that kind of stuff. So it felt honest and open. And so I got to 17, and now I would be doing the Leaving Cert at that stage, and the choice was kind of what was going to happen. Would it be college first? Would I think about this? Whatever. So I went to a priest who was a friend of mine, not a brother. He was working in another school, a very wise man. And I sat down with him and I said, "Look, here's my dilemma. Like, what do I do?" And his thing was, "Look, if this is really burning in you as much as it is, go now to them. And if it's not for you, you'll get it out of your system. And then you go to college and you're clear." But he said, if you go to college now with this burning in the back of your mind, you're not going to enter fully into college. It's always going to be there, the what ifs, whatever. So that sounded kind of sane to me, and put it to the parents that I would think about it. And their reaction, God bless both of them, was, if this is what's making you happy, go for it. But the second it stops making you happy, we're okay if you decide to kind of leave it aside, whatever. So there was great kind of freedom in that. There was great sort of awareness in that. And I went in at 17. That was the beginning of it all, Mm-hmm. That was in 1992. And I'm still here, at this point. Yeah. So that was what brought me in.
Amazing. It's something that sort of struck me there, is the burning desire that you had to join them. And I feel for a lot of men, maybe as it was for me as well, we have that desire. We have this burning desire to follow a certain path or to fulfill a certain purpose. But then there's a lot of societal pressure. There's pressure from parents or pressure from schooling to follow a different route. And, later on in years then, you feel so disconnected or so lost, or perhaps so angry that, you are where you didn't follow your true purpose.
That inspiration. Yeah. So we would say in our tradition that, we call it vocation. People hear that word, they immediately think of like a priest or a nun or whatever. But we would say vocation is the right of every human being. It's burnt into the heart of every human being. And so vocare, which is the root of that, means a calling, that there is, obviously we would call it God, but other people would call it, ultimate meaning or transcendence or whatever. But there is something calling the human being to live a life that is meaningful. And the problem in the Western world now is we mistake purpose for meaning all of the time. So purpose is action, activity. It achieves things. It's good in and of itself. There's no problem with purpose. But when you got up in the morning, you had a list of tasks to achieve, including this podcast or whatever. And that's your purpose for the day, at least. And some of those things you repeat every day, like brushing your teeth, and some of them will be unique things that you do, and hopefully you get something out of. The problem is, if purpose isn't aligned with meaning, you can keep going forever. The hamster wheel will keep turning. You'll produce money. You can even be successful. You can have, the ideal home, life, etc., that anybody would want from the outside. But you will be hollow internally if it is not in line with meaning. And that will continue to burn within you until you find something that aligns you with meaning again. St. Augustine, who was one of the great monastic fathers back in the 4th century, said about God, he was speaking about God, he said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And I think there is a restlessness, and it's a good restlessness because if it pushes us in the right direction. But if we try and fill it or deaden it or anesthetize it or kind of put it off and say, there's no point looking at this, or I'm locked in. Now, we might be locked into particular responsibilities that we have to manage, But at the same time, I think when that bell finally goes off for somebody and they step off the conveyor belt for a while and they get silence or nature or stillness or they fall in love or whatever it might be that sort of suddenly shakes the foundations for them, or it could be death or trauma as well. That can often be the way. There's a moment there where suddenly the big question that somebody has to ask is, what is this all about really? And if they're not asking that question, they're not actually being human, because as far as we know, we're the only creatures on the planet that ask that question. Every other creature seems to be perfectly okay just living their particular nature. And so what I find more and more and more is people of all ages, it doesn't matter, you can be 5 and experience it through trauma or through a gift, or you can be, 95 and suddenly go, what's it all about? But the big thing is, for anybody who's kind of waking up to it, is not to be disconsolate over what went before. Because people can do the whole, I've wasted my life thing. You haven't, because all of that becomes wisdom then to bring into the experience. There's nothing you've lived, no matter how you characterize it as good or bad, that can't become wisdom if somebody is able to actually learn from it, reflect on it. So that's the third piece of the puzzle. The only way you get from purpose to meaning is to put the reflective capacity in between those two. You'll still be living a purposeful life. I still have to get up in the morning, brush my teeth and do the jobs. But it's what are the jobs in aid of? What is it actually supporting rather than is it just about my own pleasure, my own ego, my own, whatever that might be.
Yeah. So it's in service of something greater than you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where human beings become fully human, is when it's in service. And that might be in service of a family. It might be in service of a relationship. It might be in service of, some great campaign or whatever. We believe that what we call the building of the kingdom, the working for the kingdom, for the transformation of humanity as a whole, creation as a whole, into a society of compassion and love and a spiritual awareness. That can happen, through sweeping the floor just as much as it can happen through a great campaign that transforms people, if you are doing it with the right intention. So nobody needs to sort of feel, I've got to drop everything and, run out the door and leave everything behind me. What we have to do is bring a reflective capacity into what we're doing, meet that with intention, and then even what we're doing day to day can become something extraordinary,
Then how do you discern from the ego being at play versus something higher?
Well, this is the hardest thing for every human being. Doesn't matter who you are, ego is always there. I remember one of our oldest brothers, he was in his 90s, and somebody asked him, when does the ego finally shut up? And he said, about 5 minutes after you're dead, and even then, who knows? But the problem with the ego is you need to get to know it and to be really aware of it. And then you need to treat it with a sense of humor. The ego does not like being laughed at. And so some of our most egoic action can often be in response to people who, and I don't mean cruel laughter now, but I mean that sort of idea that I need to kind of get one up on them. And then if we actually stand back and look at what we're doing, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So if we can be aware of the ridiculousness of it and kind of keep an eye on that. And secondly, I think it's about asking, is this in service of me or is it in service of the greater good, whatever that might be? And if it's in service of me, there are things that I have to do that are in service of me, like eating and drinking and being, a friend or being a family member or whatever. But the question has to be, is it self-centered? Is it pulling in on itself? Is it taking all of the energy interiorly? Or is it actually sharing and being holding it with open hand, as opposed to closed hand. So one of the big gifts of sort of the reflective practices that all of the various contemplative traditions have had all of the way down. It doesn't matter what tradition you look at. This is one of the essential ones, is trying to inculcate habits that allow you to stand back within your own life, within your own existence, and just notice and ask the question, where did that thought come from? You know, we used to say to the kids in schools when I was working with them, one of the most important questions you can ask is, when you have an opinion, is whose voice is that actually? Because it might be your voice, which is great, but it might be great Auntie Mary's, who, you know, was a Harridan and ran the family with an iron fist. You know, we've all had the experience of hearing our father or our mother speak through our tongue, you know, kind of ventriloquist from beyond the grave, maybe even. So we come into this world, and we come into this world pretty blank, okay? We have our genetic gift that's been given to us, but everything else after that, the way we look at the world, the way we think the world functions, what we expect for ourselves, generally most of that is given to us by who have surrounded us. So when we move into adulthood, one of the tasks of adulthood is to sit with all of that stuff and say, what's good, what's useful, what still serves me, what's actually going to bring me along the right path, and what doesn't. Because otherwise we get locked into a situation where we just can't get out of it, you know. To give you an example of this, we had a lovely moment. One of the retreat centres that I work in is the Sanctuary Centre in Dublin 7. And myself and another facilitator, we were working with a group of teachers. And we had a course there at the time called The Mindful Classroom. And it was around trying to recognize that there were a lot of people out there teaching teachers how to teach mindfulness to children, okay, which is great because they all thought it was going to solve all the problems. What we were saying was, no, don't worry about teaching mindfulness to them. Can you be a mindful teacher? Whether you're teaching English, maths, whatever it is, can you hold within yourself that inner reflectivity, that inner stability in the present? So we were working with a group of teachers anyway, and one of the little tasks that we do is we do an exercise that's common to most of the traditions, where we try and do eating mindfully. So we gave them a piece of chocolate, one square of chocolate, and we did it with them exactly as we would do it with the kids. So you have to take the chocolate in your hand, and you have to notice that the warmth of your hand begins to melt the chocolate, etc. And then you lift it up and you take a good old sniff, and you're to notice what memories suddenly pop up, what stimulants pop up. Can you smell the different flavors, the different notes? Is your mouth beginning to moisten because it's getting ready to eat, or whatever it might be? All of the little things that are there. Then you take the piece of chocolate and you put it on your tongue, but you don't eat it. You just leave it on your tongue. And of course, the warmth of your mouth begins to break down the chocolate. And as the chocolate breaks down, the different flavors are released, the different notes, as the official word for them. All of this begins to be released. And you also watch what memories, what images, what desires are there. Is the big desire just, oh, for God's sake, let me eat the chocolate? Or, you know, can I be patient with it, etc. When we do it with the kids, you get all kinds of reactions. I remember one kid who was just, you know, we were really egging the whole thing on of like smelling, and he just released this bit, "You're killing me here." You know, like he just needed to eat it as quickly as possible. But when we finished it, we were doing the reflection with the teachers, and there was one lady, very nice teacher, very good person, I'd say in her 40s maybe at the time, and she said she didn't look happy. And I was kind of watching her across the room. You know the way you catch the eye in a group, you kind of say, oh, what's going on there? And we said, would anybody like to say, you know, how you felt? And she put her hand up immediately and she said, I feel like you've just taken chocolate away from me forever. And I said to her, well, we actually just gave you chocolate, so what happened, you know? And she said she realized, slowing down completely, that her body did not like chocolate. She got a complete revulsion experience to chocolate. So we said, okay, let's do a little bit of work here. And she was like, I eat chocolate every day. I love chocolate, you know. And I said, well, when do you eat chocolate? So the story, to cut it all short, because it was a long reflection process with her, what had happened was, as a teacher, busy lady, busy mother, she would come home from school and she would have maybe about an hour before her own kids came home. So that was her time. That was her little quiet, you know, kind of decompression time. And she would make herself a cup of coffee and she would have a bar of chocolate and she would sit down in her kitchen and look out the window and just all was right with the world till the whirlwind of the kids arrived and all of that kind of stuff. And now she was worried what was going to happen because chocolate had been taken away. So I said, well, what does chocolate mean to you? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, can you give me any memories that arose? And she could remember her mother, who was a very busy lady herself, very good person, she, according to this woman, but she said very busy. And so when she would be kind of, as a little kid, moving around or being distracting or whatever, as the mother used to work from home, the mother would say to her, just be quiet and be still and I'll get you some chocolate. And she'd say, no problem. And she'd stop. And of course, she got the chocolate. And as the chocolate would be given to her, the mother would say, good girl, well done, no problem. So chocolate had become for her the key into that memorial experience, that sensory experience of good girl, well done. And so at the end of a busy day where maybe things have gone right and things have gone wrong and all of that kind of stuff, for her to be able to sit down quietly and calmly with her bar of chocolate was her way of saying to herself, good girl, well done. She was affirming herself in that way. But she'd never actually asked the question of her body, is this a good thing? Do you like this? Do you want this? So we ended up in a conversation where we were saying, okay, if you now know that it's about you affirming yourself, you can take chocolate out of the equation and you can simply affirm yourself. You can do a reflective practice. You can substitute a food that your body does like. You can still give yourself that time of reflection. But as she said afterwards, she would have gone on forever using the cue, using the and never actually knowing that what she was really looking for more than anything else was for Mammy to say, good girl. And every human being, myself included, there are hundreds and hundreds of those background programs running all of the time. And what the reflective capacity does, what meditation, if it's done properly, does, it centers us in a compassionate way, in a deeply aware way. It unites us to something bigger than ourselves. We begin to move into the field of transcendent meaning, where we would call God in our tradition. But what it also does is it shines the light back on ourselves and allows us to look at all of that programming and say, what's good and useful? What's the stuff that I've outgrown? Maybe it was useful long ago. It might have been very useful, but it needs to be let go of now. And I think that's the problem with the pace of our life at the moment and the kind of pressure that's put on people from the moment they get up to the moment they go to bed means that we don't have those spaces a lot of the time. And if we don't have those spaces, ego reigns supreme. Mm-hmm. You know. Sorry, long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, that's so interesting. Yeah. It's almost as though the chocolate bar from her mother was a replacement for a feeling of love that the mother was perhaps unable to express to her at the time because you're so busy, or perhaps, it wasn't a thing, for her mother to commonly do that. Yeah.
I mean, the little girl felt that was attention and love being given to her, but it was being given to her in the form of a bar of chocolate. Yeah. So the forms we receive things in are the forms we go looking for. Yeah. If the mother had given her fruit, maybe it would have been fruit, who knows? But obviously, and of course, it's extra potent when it's chocolate being given, because you're getting the sugar high and you're getting the cocoa buzz and you're getting all of that kind of stuff, particularly years ago when chocolate was actually chocolate as opposed to kind of what it is today. But yeah, I mean, it's so important that we at least have the awareness to ask ourselves, what's going on? What's really going on? And for most people, getting back to the ego search again, even asking that of yourself can be useful to some extent, but you actually probably need some kind of support, community, therapy, direction, something. You need a mirror. And I think what happens with a lot of people is they expect even their partner to be the processing therapist as well as the partner, which they were never meant to be.
Yeah, more pressure.
Absolutely. More pressure on both of them, It's the fix me thing, I love you, now fix me. And that's really dangerous. We don't do that with our community. We have our elders within the community who provide direction, etc. But we would always go to brothers who are outside the community we live in for that, because you need to have breathing and space. And then, when counseling is required, we'll go for counseling. When support is required in whatever way it's required. If you're going to really try and live the reflective life, then you need to have as many mirrors, as many lenses as possible, because you'll always find something new.
Mm. Yeah, that's again, and then it sort of goes back to let's say the disconnected community aspect too, where a lot of those mirrors are now missing. And oftentimes the mirrors that we see are the mirrors we want to see, or the mirrors that are attractive to us, such as social media, seeing people who are better off than us, seeing again a life that perhaps we feel is so beyond us. And
Sure.
again, that is a mirror, but it's a mirror through a screen. It's not a mirror through someone who's there in integrity to show you what's perhaps truly going on for yourself, so you can, reach the point of truth.
We're being trained from a very early age to focus our relationality on comparison. And now, don't get me wrong, that's always been present. We always compared. There was always somebody who ran faster than you as a kid, or whatever, or the people that you looked up to, and you said, "God, I'd love to be like him or like her," or whatever it might be. That there's a natural element in that, because that's teaching a lesson, which is the lesson of we're all different. We all have different gifts. You're probably not going to, be as good a footballer as him, or as good a dancer as her, or whatever it might be along the way. But there's a difference between providing aspirational heroes that invite you to find what you're good at and become good at that, and maybe learn from their discipline or learn from because those things transcend category. You might want to be a footballer, but you can admire the discipline and the work that goes into it, and you can then take that value and say, well, in whatever I'm interested in, why don't I bring that there? The difficulty with the kind of comparison we're being offered now is it's aspirational comparison. So it's that constant feeling of I'm never good enough in my own life, as opposed to the idea that in some way I can learn from somebody and bring their wisdom to bear on a particular existence. And because of the way social media produces this kind of algorithm of despair nearly, the more you go looking, the worse it kind of gets. And because it's being particularly aimed at adolescents who are, human beings in formation at that stage, the difficulty is that we're encoding within them this feeling of never good enough, never good enough, never good enough. And I've seen it in so many young people. I am very, very glad I grew up without the internet. Because I was a very curious person. As I said to you before, all the why questions. I had people to ask the why questions. And I had loads of people who would say, I don't know, go and look, and it was libraries and books and stuff like that. But I would probably have avoided the elders if I could just go to a machine and tap in the answer and get an answer. Maybe not the right answer, but an answer straight away. So I think we know from all of the work that's been done, the neurobiological work that's been done, and all the rest of it, the adolescent brain just isn't ready for what it's being fed constantly. And we end up with a lot of adults then who have been trained to always be dissatisfied with who they are and the existence that they're in. And this kind of constant push in the back of their mind that somewhere it's better. If I could only get there, somewhere it's better, And it'll never be. We all know if you're not happy with yourself, you're going to bring that everywhere.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And then how do you sort of bridge that gap between the disconnection that's happening with adolescence and the healthy, more integrated adult later on in life? Have you witnessed this over the course of perhaps it is this generation of teenagers that have really become immersed with social media? They've sort of been born into it more so than previous generations.
I mean, it was interesting. I gave a school retreat some years ago, and they were sixth year girls from a very well-known secondary school in Dublin. And unusually, because it's very rare now, they were doing an overnight retreat. So teachers were taking them away. Now, I was just going in to give input, coming away again. But when I arrived, the teachers gave me the program to look at. And the first thing that they had put down was no phones. They were taking all the phones from the kids. I said, have you told them this? And they said, no, we're about to tell them. Well, I said, I just want you to make it really clear this was not my idea. Because I knew if I was the one who had done this, they would not take anything in from me after that. I would be the enemy. And the teachers were kind of like, really? I said, yeah, you're doing this bit. So they got up and they said, now, girls, we're going to surrender our phones. And it's only for one night. We're going to talk to each other and listen to each other. And there was a groan and all that kind of stuff. But they had a little box, like a kind of a slightly bigger than a shoebox. And they went around and all the girls had to put their phones in. And then the teacher walked out of the hall and every head followed that box all the way out of the door. It was like just until that door closed, it was like something releasing, cutting. So we went ahead and we had a good day. It was fine. So they were staying there for the night. I went off and I was coming back the following morning to continue the input. And it had gone really well. It was fine. I arrived back that morning. They were just finishing breakfast when I arrived in. I went over to the teacher's table and I said, how'd you get on last night? Did everything go okay? And they said, yeah, it was fine. It was great. They had a great night. They were playing games and chatting and talking and all that kind of stuff. And they let them sit up late or whatever it was. And then one of the teachers said, well, it was fine till about 3:00. And I said, why? What happened at 3? And she said, well, she was fast asleep and there was a knock on her door and she answered the door and there were 3 of the girls standing there in their pajamas. And she said, is everything all right? Is somebody hurt? And they said, no, everybody's fine. Everybody's fine. We were just sent by the others to check that the phones are still here. And she said, of course they're still here. Where have they gone? Well, we need to see them. So she said she brought out the box and opened the lid and the 3 of them stood around. And these are her words, not mine. She said, it was like watching Awake, when people stand over the coffin looking in, And she said the 3 of them stood there and then kind of went, okay, we can go to bed now. They're still in the building. And they went to bed. And she said it was the first time it really dawned on her how connected they were to the phone. Like the anxiety had been removed from it, even though they knew this was in another room. And that was it. Now, the rest of it went well. Everything was fine. At the end, they got their phones back. And of course, the minute the phone was back, I said to the teacher after, what was the bus like? Totally silent. They were all catching up and whatever. So when we have that as the kind of de facto end of things, this is the window through which you're seeing the world, right? The window through which information is being received, in which the world is being built, in which you're gaining most of your knowledge. We used to say as clergy, in a busy world, somebody comes to say mass or service on a Sunday, and we have 10, 15 minutes to preach the word. And then for the rest of the week, all the news is coming in, all the negative stuff is coming in, all of the difficult stuff is coming in. And it's very difficult in 20 minutes to bolster somebody for a week if they're not doing spiritual practice themselves. Now we're dealing with people who 24/7 have a window into the world. And there's great stuff on it. It's really helpful, along the way. I use a phone, I'm on social media, all of that kind of stuff. But if you're not using it, to use that overused word, mindfully, if you're not using it well, if you're not thinking about, am I contributing to compassion or contributing to the world, then it just becomes something that's just dragging, it's dragging somebody away. So when you have all of these young people like this, the greatest gift you can give them and the thing that they're hungriest for, even without knowing that they're hungry for, is real human connection, which means somebody who'll actually listen to them more than even talk at them or educate them. Connection with nature, because they're just not going out there. And so bringing them to understand beauty and connection in nature. And the third piece, which is the spiritual piece, if you like, is giving them the techniques necessary to open up the reflective capacity in their own self, so that the next time they go on the phone or whatever it might be, or the friends even are talking, whatever, they have a piece inside them that says, is this true? Is it useful? Do I need to check up on this? If somebody is saying to me I should be this tall or this thin or this muscled or this whatever, like, is that actually true? Is that going to increase joy, or why would I be doing it along the way? If you don't have that questioning part of you going on, and that has been given good techniques with which to do it, then the difficulty is the parts of the brain necessary to be able to stand up to people and be strong in who you are, they do atrophy. Like, the brain is a muscle, and like all muscle, if it doesn't get used, it atrophies. So I think if we can give young people, and that's what we've tried to do with the various programs I've been involved in, if you can give them the experience of real deep wisdom that comes from the deep wisdom traditions, the contemplative traditions, the religions, etc., the questioning parts of that, the parts of that are actually bringing you into what we would call the 3 great transcendental values, which is the true, the beautiful, and the good. If you can get them to say, that's what I'm going to search for my whole life, the true, the beautiful, and the good, then they're on the path. Even if they don't know it, they're on the path at that stage. But what you find is if you give them a little bit of the true, a little bit of the beautiful, and a little bit of the good, they'll be hungry for it forevermore, because they know that fills me. That satisfies me in a way that nothing else does, because that's what you were made for. you know.
And they're feeling just they're being fed little bits of that through social media, through the phone.
Yeah.
And which is not enough.
They're getting the sparks of that, but they're not actually being shown how to light the fire within themselves in such a way that it can burn for their whole life, and that they don't have to worry about others, you know, in that sense. I mean, compassionately worry about others, absolutely, but not worrying about what others think of you. That's the biggest issue, you know.
Yeah. It's the hard work, obviously, as well. I mean, that's the difficult path, but the more rewarding one. And then, you know, later on in life, and a lot of the work that I do, which is quite similar to your own, somewhat similar to your own, is meeting these men who have been on this path of searching and have perhaps found what it was that they felt like they were searching for, only to still come up feeling empty.
Yeah.
And, you know, this idea of money, career, family, the car, the house, all these things, they've sort of ticked all the boxes, and then they're still so empty within. And then this is usually the point where they turn towards themselves, and it's often the point when they turn towards, you know, seeking help from others.
Yeah.
And again, I feel there's so much confusion out there for a lot of men, specifically at the moment.
I would agree. But I also think let me set the context. So I think one of the things that has happened, obviously, there's been huge societal change over the last 30, 40 years. It's been massive, and there's been a lot of good in that, and also there's been a lot of throwing babies out with bathwater kind of thing. And one of the things that we've lost is the map, the unconscious map that men would have had that told them or taught them how to become good men. And I'm not talking about the kind of toxic masculinity stuff. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm talking about the idea of a man as part of a community, a man connected to the land, a man who was there to serve and protect his family, a man who was there to deepen relationship with, not just with his spouse or partner or whatever it might be, or his children, but also with the wider community, you know, and the unconscious gifting of that that would have allowed somebody to kind of say at the end of their life, or looking back on their life, that they had made a contribution to a community. You know, a community would feel the loss of them along the way.
Being of service again.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the elements that was missing in that old map, hugely though, was reflection on and development of emotional integration within men. That was missing. We all know them. We've met them along the way, you know. And so there was this idea that if everything was successful on the outside, the man didn't have to do a whole lot of work on the inside, and emotions were processed maybe at the side of a GAA match, or drinking himself into oblivion on a Friday night or Saturday night, or whatever it might be. And as a result, families suffered, and women suffered, particularly because of all of that. The female map has changed completely, and changed for the better, right? It's changed completely. But the problem is men are trying to work with the modern world with a broken map, and with frustration around the fact that because the map doesn't work anymore, they feel like they don't work anymore. Because all of the things that the last 20, 30 years has told them will bring you success as a man, as we know, as you've just said, like, you can have it all and it won't fill the gap inside. And women, by and large, again, all of these things are generalizations, you know, but by and large, what I've seen with women is the hunger for reflectivity, the hunger for community, the hunger for connectivity, the hunger for support and friendship activates at a much earlier stage. It is sadly often necessary because of all of the other pressures and structures and prejudices that are around. But by and large, most women will you know, come into adulthood with a solid group of friends, with people that support, with reflective practices, and being very grounded in their bodies, because they had to be grounded in their bodies. And then you look at the men, who end up in their 20s or 30s. I mean, I always think a wedding is a place to watch this particularly. Like, it really is, you know. And we go to weddings, obviously, because we're there for the service or whatever. And then you sit back and you watch what goes on, and you watch evolution take place and devolution take place, right? At the same wedding. But there can be that thing of devolving into the kind of unrestrained ego and unrestrained desire. And when men take that path, it's a very dangerous path, because they will not just take themselves down with it, but they take everybody around them with it as well. So when you're talking about the man who wakes up in his 30s or 40s and says, right, I need to do the work, that's a hugely powerful thing. And hopefully he starts working on the health of the body and the health of the mind, and he begins to connect with nature a bit more. And there's tribal connection, if we call it that, with other men and all of that kind of stuff. Hopefully with elders, because one of the big difficulties, I think, with a lot of the men's work industry that's out there is they all tend to be peers. And there aren't the elders with them. And if you don't have the grandfathers with the fathers, a father can't learn how to be a grandfather without a grandfather there. There's a principle in social anthropology that says you cannot be initiated into a state beyond the state of the peers that you are in by your peers, because they haven't had the experience. You know, I can tell you all about Japan. I can talk about Japan. I can draw you pictures of Japan. But if I haven't been to Japan, I haven't had the experience. You know, it's lesser than. So from that point of view, I think one of the things that's really important for men is that they also encounter elders, male figures who have integrated fully, but who are 20, 30, 40 years ahead of them. Because they've learned how to integrate the experience. They've learned how to deal with the failing body. They've learned how to deal with the fact that the emotional life, the mental life, the spiritual life is actually the core of it all, because the body eventually falls away anyway. So a lot of the industry of men's work, unfortunately, I think, actually holds them at a particular point. It allows reflectivity to develop. It allows all of that. But I know an awful lot of men who've gone into the men's work world, found huge richness in it. Everything was great. But then it kind of burned out again on the other end of that, because it was like, well, where do you go from there?
Big thanks to Earthkind, our new sponsor of the Modern Warrior podcast. They have some incredible products like the tallow and honey balm, which is great for skin hydration and repair. And then they've got the wild yam balm, which helps to relax the body and calm the mind. I've been using both of these products. The wild yam balm has certainly been helping with my sleep, and the tallow and honey balm has certainly helped with my skin. So go check them out. Click the link below and grab yourself a couple of these.
Whereas if you look at what women generally have, is often multi-generational relationships. And when you see the multi-generational relationship, there is a greater wisdom in that, because, someone has walked the walk ahead of you and can kind of show where you need to go. And the same is true for the adolescents. If you're dealing with adolescents and they're just peers together and there's no good eldership, be that a parental figure or a teacher or whatever it might be. I mean, we all know the big program, the One Good Adult program, how it's necessary for young people. If that isn't there, then they just circle. They circle forever. And it becomes what we call negative rites of initiation take place, where it gets worse and worse and becomes more gang oriented or clique oriented, because the elder, the kind of the silverback, if you like, isn't there to kind of put order on them and say, actually, you've got to listen now, or you've got to, you've got to actually move into a different stage of life.
They're limited by the limitations of the peer or the leader or the person in charge, essentially. Yeah.
So if you look at two great spiritual lineages, right? If you look at Christianity and Buddhism, a lot of what they teach is similar. A lot of what they teach is very different. But the principle is, if you want to be a full Christian, right, you have to have a relationship with Christ. You have to have a relationship with the community, what we would call the church. And you have to know the teaching, right, the scripture. Okay? So they're the three. You go to Buddhism, the Buddha taught the same. You take refuge in the Buddha, in the life story of the person. But you can't go further than that if you don't have the Sangha, the community of eldership that's going to actually teach you and bring you into, teach you the practices and help you to reflect, whatever. And then you have the Dharma, the actual teaching, the law. Now, why have two lineages that are, thousands of years and thousands of miles apart? Why have they said the same thing? Because as human beings, we need those things to function. We need the teacher, we need the community, and we need the teachings. And what very often you'll have is the internet will give you the teachings, no problem. But it will also, it won't invite you into practice. It won't look after you and assist you in terms of, you're doing this wrong and you should be doing a bit more of this, or the
won't hold you accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The teacher can hold you accountable, but the thing we always have to be careful of is if we become utterly dependent on human teachers, then we get into the kind of, and I mean this not in the technical sense, but in the negative sense, we get into the guru mentality, where all kinds of manipulation and problems and abuse can arise. And if we don't have the wider community is there to hold the teacher accountable as well. So from that point of view, if you have the three, you have a tripod, if you like, that actually kind of holds the person in reflective awareness. Now, after that, people need to choose their own particular tradition or whatever they want to work with, obviously. But if they're seeking the true, the beautiful, and the good, and if they establish those three legs, if you like, around them, where they're able to bring a reflective capacity to bear on the teacher, on the teachings, and on the community, you're doing well at that point. But a lot of people who go seeking, they'll lock onto a particular teacher, then there's problems with that. They lock on to maybe the teachings, but without the subtlety of the actual teachers, the community, there's problems with that. Or they'll go to a community that has lost contact with its teachings or with its inspiration. And again, you have to hold the teachings up to the lens of, is this good? Is it true? Is it useful? And if it's not, then walk away,
It's very interesting because I'm bringing that back to myself as a person who ultimately holds space for men and guides them through a process. And then it's important that I have someone there as well that holds me accountable and that I can go to for refuge or for reflection or for guidance, and that's that, you're bringing that very important point across where, there's a limitation there.
Sure.
So I'm 41, I've lived 41 years. Yeah. Haven't lived 65 years or 70 years.
You can't go there yet.
So I can't go to 70 years of age and then say, well, you know what, there's all of this that happens as well after the age of 41. So, but, I've been through experiences and situations and, I've gathered, as you said, from the past wisdom and knowledge from that I simply bring back and help them through there. But there's a limitation. And that's something that's certainly struck me as in the work that I do and the service I provide is, okay, are you being limited and therefore limiting these individuals?
Yeah.
And that's an important point for me because it's not something I've actually properly contemplated before. I've definitely had teachers who've been older than me in their 60s who've brought a lot of wisdom and knowledge to me. But again, is that enough?
See, I think there's an old principle in the martial arts, you might be familiar with this, where they say the student says, I don't know. The teacher says, I know. And the master says, I don't know. So that cycle has to be gone through. So when we wake up, we say, I don't know. I don't know what it's all about. I don't know where it's going. And we go to the teacher and the teacher says, oh, I know. And they give a particular map and they're digesting the experience of their life and they're putting that forward. But if the teacher doesn't have the master who's then able to say to him, play with the form, there's an a wonderful Zen story of a young monk who goes to his master and he says, Master, what happens after I die? And the master says, I don't know. And he said, but you're the teacher, you're the master. And he says, yes, but I'm not a dead master. I haven't had the experience yet. I can give you the map, I can give you the teaching, I can give you everything that you need to be able to prepare for it, but you have to go through the experience. And so one of the questions we always have to ask, no matter what lineage we're in, no matter what work we're with, no matter what religion we believe in even, is when a teacher is in front of us teaching am I seeing the following? Am I seeing integration of what they're saying, what in their own life, obviously? Are they bearing fruit? Are they a better human being? Are they more compassionate? Are they kind? Are they loving? Are they the kind of person who is not just sitting with the group and teaching, but like, how do they treat their family? How do they treat their friends? How do they treat animals? How do they treat, the things that have real connection with them? Because there's far better teaching in that. But if you have somebody who thinks it's more important that I'm doing this work out here than keeping the house clean and the family well, there's a real issue there. And the third piece I would always say about it is, what's your gut actually saying about this person? Because we're pretty finely tuned as well. And if there's any kind of mismatch between the conversation and who the person seems to be, then you have every right to just go no and walk away. And that doesn't mean that what they were saying was wrong. You can always take the teaching with you, because often what's being spoken is truth, but is what is being lived true? That's the question. So for ourselves, obviously, as a monastic, as a friar, a Capuchin Franciscan friar, there is, we can be seen as kind of, oh, well, they must have it all together. They must know it all. Like, he's a big beard, he must be wise, or he's wearing a brown robe, so therefore he must be wise, whatever. But all of this imagery that has been handed down to us by the tradition is meant to indicate this is a person who's trying. That's it. But who will try every day and who will begin again every day. So if people say to me, from the moment you got your inspiration, oh, you're fantastic and it's wonderful, and for 35 years you've gone, I have had the most circuitous of routes. I have had the greatest doubts and crises. I've had the moments where I thought it was all falling apart, and the moments where I thought I'd put it all back together again, and then it turned out I hadn't put it all back together again properly, because I'm human. And that's for everybody. So the only thing you can say about anybody you're meeting on this side of the grave anyway is they're a work in progress. And if you're really lucky, they're trying. And that's what you're doing, hopefully, and that's what I'm trying to do as well. And in the midst of that, then that's where truth will communicate itself to the people we work with. But if we claim anything more than that, then the people need to run away.
Yeah. It's ego.
Yeah, straight away.
Yeah,
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where does the meditative practice fall into this process?
So I suppose for us, I mean, in our own life and lineage, it's the core of it. We try to spend, and I again try to spend 2 hours a day in meditation within our way of life. And I teach meditation. I even have a podcast teaching meditation now, that I never thought that would happen. All of this kind of stuff. But the most important element around it is actually, meditation is something you don't learn. It's something you remember how to do. That's very important for people, because people can be very intimidated by meditation. And I have to have the bell, and I have to have the cushion, and I have to have, whatever. Do I need to shave my head and live on a mountain? You're already meditating. You started out as a meditator. In some studies that were done a number of years ago, in looking at the brain waves of deep meditators, they noticed deep similarity between the way the deep meditator meditates and the brainwaves of the child in the womb in the last 3 months. So you were preparing to come into this world by doing deep meditation. You were on deep retreat, right? For the last, and then you're born, and this wonderful distracting world takes you out of your meditation. Okay, so the good thing about that is your body and your mind know how to do this. All you're doing is creating the conditions necessary for the body and mind to learn, to come back to it. So if somebody says to me, look, in my really busy life, all I can do is like 3 minutes here or 2 minutes there. Fantastic. Start with that. Because when you start with that, the hunger will begin to grow. And if the hunger begins to grow, really, you'll find the time and the space then after that, I often say to people, you might be living a really busy life, but, what is it that you do every day? You take a shower, you brush your teeth, you go to the bathroom, you eat your lunch, whatever it might be. You can bring meditation to all of those, and not all of the time. I like to go for a walk in the park in a very deeply meditative way. I like to go for a walk in the park with earphones in, listening to music. That's fine. But it's to make sure that you're choosing the spaces, you're creating the spaces. And this is part of the reflective capacity. So when youngsters of 11 and 12 tell me, I'm keeping a diary, that's meditation. That's externalized meditation. They're reflecting. Or when somebody says, I've got my favorite book, or I've got my favorite piece of music. We did one thing with one group of kids. They were talking about how, when they get sad and when they get down and when they were using the word depressed. What they really meant was sad. Depressed is a very different thing. But unfortunately, it's become the language we use for any kind of melancholy at all now at this stage. So they were saying, when I get depressed, I said, well, what do you do? And they said, I listen to music. I go to my room and I throw the blanket over me and I listen to music. I said, but what do you listen to? And every one of them had a sad playlist, right? With all sad music. And I said, and what does the music do? Well, it makes me sadder, right? So I said, okay, well, the next time you begin to feel like this, I'm going to ask you to do an experiment. And the experiment is, I want you to play yourself the playlist that you put on when you're getting ready to go out for a night. Just try that. And they were like, oh, that one. I said, just try it. So they went off for a couple of weeks and I was back and I was chatting to them and I said, well, what happened? And they said, couldn't get sad. And they were almost angry, you took it away. I said, look, the sad playlist is there. We all sometimes need to feel sad. Sometimes we need to be really with it. But there's also times when we need to kind of be able to move and begin again or whatever. And what I was showing them was they had tools that they didn't know were tools. So we have this massive toolkit around us, which can include things like just going out into nature, just putting your feet on the ground, just having a shower and feeling the water on your body rather than just running constantly, slowing down, switching off the radio in the car so that you're not arguing with a politician who can't hear you, and actually just looking around you. The car can be a wonderful hermitage. We used to say to business people particularly, or people who are out working, and we're coming home to a family, that man or woman who's coming back and they've got all the stress of the day with them, sit in the car for 3 minutes, put your hands on the steering wheel and say, I'm leaving it here. And then go in. And it's amazing the difference and change that can happen if you're working with intention. So if you can begin to mold an intentional practice, regardless of how long or short it is, learning the basic techniques of things like awareness of the breath, awareness of the body, because all the traditions teach at least those, and then begin to say, I will bring my attention to the things that actually lift me, relax me, bring me into the fullness of presence. It can be an extraordinary shift and change. And that's not someone having to say, I've got to spend hours on a cushion somewhere, Hopefully they get to that. Mm-hmm. But the little things change. Small changes, will shift things massively over time if people allow those small changes in.
What about that piece in terms of what you mentioned there in sitting with the sadness, that, perhaps allowing ourselves to feel that emotion fully is the way to move through it, as opposed to perhaps feeling it, but then distracting ourselves with maybe happy music or with some other activity.
I think that as long as we're able to differentiate between the self and the feeling, because what most people nowadays have is such confusion within themselves about what they're feeling anyway, that to try and find the self in the midst of this cloud of feeling. The old word for cloud was nebula. That's where we talk about the clouds of stars, the nebula. And in our meditative tradition, we speak of nebulas of melancholy or distracting thoughts or even images, because we're so image-centered nowadays. You say to somebody, sit still, put your feet on the ground, close your eyes, listen to your breath. What happens? The mind explodes, right? Because it has all this unprocessed stuff it wants to bring up straight away. And often people go, oh, that's terrible. I'm in a terrible state. I never want to do that again. Distract me quick. Okay, so that's listening to the music, whatever it might be. But if we can sit with that and recognize, actually, you're not that. This is unprocessed stuff that is now placing itself before your attention. And some of it might be inspirational, some of it might be terrible, some of it might be trauma that needs to be dealt with, whatever. If you can remain stable with your own breath in the present moment and allow that stuff to simply move by, without grasping at it, without even, consciously trying to learn from it, just letting it move, you will discover over time that there is a still, calm, centered individual always there. And the rest floats, the rest moves, the rest is the weather around the mountain. Now, this is where the community becomes really important, the community path, because you will need people to process the stuff with. It's not that it just goes away. You need to have the other field where you're dealing with the stuff with somebody, where you can say, listen, every time I go into meditation, I'm really dealing with melancholy or fear, anxiety, whatever it might be. And you've got somebody then to process the stuff and learn the lessons with. But the mere fact of recognizing there is you, and then there is all the stuff around you and within you, that turns down the volume of that stuff. It doesn't give it as much power to actually cripple people or shift people. It's been said a lot lately because there's been this wonderful renaissance of the Irish language. But one of the ways in which older languages, Irish is only just one of them, talked about emotion and feeling was they were very clear on the subtle states of really separating out. There wasn't just sadness. There were multiple words for sadness. There were multiple words for different states. You know, you weren't just angry. You had multiple words for I'm peeved. I'm a little bit, irritated. I'm whatever. And when we begin to use those kind of vocab, the subtle state vocabs, we begin to actually lessen the power of the narrative. So give emotional vocabulary to yourself. Begin to recognize that as the older language is taught, emotions are things that are around you and moving around you. They are not in you, and you are not them. English is the worst language around emotion because you say, I am sad, I am angry. Love, for example, is one of the most misunderstood words because your experience growing up taught you what love is. And my experience growing up taught me what love is. And there's nobody to say that your definition and my definition are the same. So if two people come together and they say, I love you to each other, the next question has to be, what do you mean by that? Rather than, will you marry me? And I say this to couples as they're getting ready for marriage all of the time. Have you ever actually asked, where did your prospective spouse learn what the meaning of love is? How was love shown in their home, in their family or whatever? Because if you don't know that, you're essentially a foreigner walking into a foreign country with a language that you don't know, and you're trying to communicate in it. So like the Greeks would say, they had 4 different words for love. They had storge, which was, I'd love a cup of tea, right? They had philia, which is, I love you as a friend. I have great affection for you. I'll die for you nearly, but philia is deep, deep love, but it's friendship. They had eros then, which is the love of desire, which is I love you, but I want something from you, right? It's the there's nothing wrong with it. It's one of the 4 great loves, but it's by itself it can corrupt.
Yeah, it's exchange.
Yeah, and then you have agape, and agape is love as communion, which is hopefully the love that every human being will experience from their beloveds, whoever they are, their children, their family, their partners, their spouses, or whatever, which says, your love completes me as my love completes you. And we are greater than the whole, greater than our parts when we're one whole together. And hopefully you move through all of those. And there's different times in the day when somebody will be at eros and the other person will be at agape, and somebody will be at philia and somebody will be at whatever. But if we don't know what's going on between those, if we can't actually name them for ourselves, then the panic in a human being who can't describe what's really going on. When we were working with teenagers, we discovered this hugely, that the emotional vocabulary was gone. So you'd say to somebody, how are you feeling today? Huh. Which actually meant, I don't know. So we started a form of conversation with them called synesthetic inquiry. So synesthesia is the idea that, synesthetes are people who color has a corresponding sound or smell or taste or whatever it might be. And it also has an emotional significance that's often left out of the conversation, but it's there. So we'd say to somebody, what color are you today? What smell are you today? What sound are you today? And the first thing they do is you crack a smile because you haven't been asked, what smell are you, And whatever they would say, you would then say to them, what smell do you want to be today, though? And it was often very different. And then giving them agency within it, you would say to them, if you're this smell now and you want to be that smell, what do you think you need to do in order to get yourself from that smell to this smell? Now we have real reflection going on. We have real learning going on. So to give you an example, it's one of my favorite examples. I use it all the time. With one kid came in one day and I could see she wasn't feeling great. She was kind of moping a bit. And I said, what color are you today? And she said, I'm snot green. Now, immediately we all know, like, you know, just have that feeling. But the danger is me to project that what I think that is. So you just left them at it. And I said to her, what feeling do you want to be? What color do you want to be? And she said, I want to be sky blue. I said, great. So what's going to get you from snot green to sky blue? And she said, I think I just need to go outside and just sit for a few minutes and maybe have a cup of tea. I said, great, go for it. So she went off around the garden and she had her cup of tea and she chose to come back into the group and sat down. I said, where are we now? And she said, I can see the blue, it's coming. Right? So if I had said to her, are you sad? Are you melancholic? Are you, did something happen, whatever? She doesn't want to give me the narrative of the stuff. Now later, if somebody wants to give you the story, that's great. But you're giving them the freedom to be able to work with them towards shifting an emotional state without necessarily either revealing a narrative that they don't want to talk about yet, perhaps, or they don't want to talk. And you're also giving them agency within it. It's not, well, I'm going to fix you. I'm going to tell you how to get from snot green to blue. Just, hold your breath and hop on one leg and you'll be grand.
Yeah. Don't take their power away.
No,
yeah.
They have to find their way. And if they find their way, that's brilliant. Another one of the exercises we did with them on the reflective capacity emotionally was around language and how words have weight. Every one of the religious traditions, every one of the sacred traditions in our world teaches words have weight, and be very careful what you say. Be very careful when it's let out. And we're all bad at it, myself included, but we try, okay? But one of the things we did with them was the SALT exercise, we called it. So we gave them a piece of paper and we put them all sitting facing a wall with enough distance that nobody could see into your page. And they got loads of salt on the page. And of course, they start playing with it and tasting it and all of that kind of stuff, as you'd expect. This really is salt. And you say, yeah, it really is. We told you it was salt. We're not joking with you. We used to relax them down into a kind of a basic relaxation meditation, which by then they were pretty good at because they'd been at it for 4 or 5 weeks. And we'd ask them to visualize a sky. And in the sky, they would see clouds coming across. And the first thing they were to see as the cloud came across was, the way you look for shapes in clouds sometimes, was to say, what was the best thing anybody ever said about you? And to really feel what it was like to see that word in the sky again. What was it like? And then with your finger to draw in the salt, either the letters or a symbol of that word or whatever it was. And we'd be very clear with them, nobody will see this. And then they were to sit with that image and to really think about it and to say, okay, I can feel the feeling from the word. And then they rub it all out. So nobody will ever see that again. And the next step was, what's the worst thing that's ever been said about you? Okay. So now they do the same thing and they sit with it. And it was amazing. You could feel the shift in the room, right? What was it like to have that said about you? Now, we never found out what it was. All out again. Next one. What's the worst thing you've ever said about somebody else? So now we're moving from self to compassion. And they would sit with that. And again, the room was darker nearly at that stage, And they'd sit with it, see it in the sky. The clouds would blow away. They would blow this away. It's all gone. And the last piece then, obviously, because you want to bring them up, was what's the best thing you've ever said about somebody? Work with that. So in 4 simple steps, the weight of words, the weight of language, because they're visualizing, they're using the part of their brain that otherwise would have distracted them. The imagination would have taken them away because it's a very quick imagination. It's used to quick movement. And because of the tactility of the salt, literally scratching it in, it goes in internally. And because they've all tasted the salt, they now have a sensory cue for this exercise. Whenever they taste salt again, they're going to remember. I can use my words for good. I can use my words for ill. And I know what it's like when somebody uses good words about me. And I know what it's like when somebody uses bad words about me. So now I can empathize. The change in them after that, in the way they would speak to each other, was just incredible. Because they'd never actually had the time to sit with, oh, my words actually mean something. They're powerful, you know? And I think this is one of the things where, come back to your question around the meditative end of things. Where's the meditation in that? Like, they went home and they'd say, oh, we meditated with salt today. And what are you talking about? But the meditative aspect of that is the slowing down, the registering, the receiving of the effect, but always going back to a place of absolute stability. You know, we brought them in gently, and at the end of all of those, the four experiences of that, there's a lot of bringing them out very gently, where they're grounded and solid and all of that kind of stuff, and they feel grand. But it was incredible. And I think that this is one of the things people forget about. Meditation is often seen as this practice of, oh, I bliss out and I'm relaxed for a while, and then, oh, life is waiting for me back there. If your life and your meditative practice aren't actually affecting each other, then you're not meditating. So you can evaluate your practice by coming out and saying, is there anybody in my life who would look at me since I started meditating and say, oh, you're better. You've improved in many ways. I don't know what it is about you, but you have a kind of I want to be close to you. I want to be around you because there is a field. And I also know that you're not going to talk to me or speak to me or hurt me in a way that maybe possibly you would have, even inadvertently before. If that's not happening, then it's not good practice, you know. I mean, anybody in sport will tell you, you know, you pay the pro to come and teach you, and the pro teaches you a little bit, or the coach teaches you or whatever. But if you're not getting better, you know, you change. So.
Brother Richard, thank you so much. We could go on and on here. I feel
no
there's going to be a part 2 somewhere along the way here.
Happy to come back anytime.
The time absolutely flew there, so I was fully engaged, and I'm sure the listeners were too. And again, for anyone who's interested in taking up some meditation or following your work and perhaps purchasing your book as well, which you have out there, please let them all know where they can find you.
So the courses that I teach generally are from the Sanctuary. You'll find that at www.sanctuary.ie, which is in Dublin 7. If you just look up Brother Richard, you'll find the rest.
Yeah, brilliant. No problem. All the links will be there in the show notes.
Yeah,
so thank you so much. Until the next time.
Thank you, and blessings to you and to your listeners.
God bless you too. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode. If there has been something that has resonated with you on this conversation, ping me a message over on Instagram at Gavin and let me know what it was. Chat soon.